But I was unhealthily excited for the PS5, like cringingly so. I did what I could to buy one. I waited for Walmart to update their website to drop the PS5, but the website buffered heavily upon refreshing, and I managed to get one in my online cart. But by the time I checked out, the console sold out that wave. I kept at it, sitting in the chaos of the PS5 launch, and somehow snagged one through the Sony Direct within 2 months of release. I felt like I'd won the lottery. I genuinely thought this was going to be one of the greatest console generations ever. Sony had momentum, goodwill, and everything going for them after the PS4 era. Honestly, this isn't even the first time Sony had pulled this. The PS2 was a cultural phenomenon, best-selling console of all time, a library so big and diverse it still holds up as the greatest in gaming history. Then the PS3 came out, and for the first few years it was a mess. The price was absurd, $600 at launch, which was fucking jaw-dropping at the time. The cell processor was notoriously difficult to develop for, and third-party games often ran noticeably worse than their Xbox 360 counterparts. Sony spent years digging out of that hole. They eventually did, and the back half of the PS3's life produced some genuinely great exclusives, but the early damage was real. Then the PS4 happened, and Sony seemed to have learned their lesson. Affordable price, developer-friendly hardware, a laser focus on prestige single-player exclusives, Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, 2018, Spider-Man, The Last of Us Part 2, and Bloodborne, which I platinumed and enjoyed every single bit of. It was one of the strongest console runs in recent memory. The goodwill Sony built with the PS4 was enormous. So when the PS5 launched, people were confident. Sony had proven they could deliver, and that's what makes the PS5 generation sting so much more than the PS3 era did. With the PS3, Sony was a humbled company fighting back from an embarrassing launch. With the PS5, they came in on top with every advantage imaginable, and they still managed to fumble that shit. And then, nothing. I grabbed Spider-Man Remastered and Miles Morales at launch. Both great games. I didn't have the original Spider-Man, but it was still good to play it remastered. I got the Platinum Trophy for both, but let's be honest, one of them was a PS4 game with a fresh coat of paint and faster loading times, and the other one was essentially DLC, or you could argue that Miles Morales could have been DLC that got inflated into a full title. That was what Sony said immediately, and I spent a huge chunk of my early PS5 time just playing PS4 games or games I could have played on PC, but I wanted to on TV on a 4K screen. That's just a slightly bigger game library with better load times. The actual PS5 exclusives I can point to, the Demon's Souls remake. It looks good, but it is a remake. Gran Turismo 7, a great game, and I know it's on PS4, but why would I play it on last gen when I could on current gen? Though Sony's live service monetization attempts nearly poisoned it at launch, with the always online requirement being absolutely valid criticism. And people criticize the graphics for it being too bland, but when you actually looked at the tracks in GT7 and their real life picture counterparts, they look identical. People were just spoiled by what other racing games gave them visually. It's like comparing someone with a fake natural makeup look to someone legitimately without makeup. The GT7 graphics hate was overblown and built on a misunderstanding. But otherwise, GT7 was pretty freaking decent. And Astrobot, which came out years into the generation and is generally one of the best games ever come out to PlayStation, it feels like a really happy accident. Like a first-party studio was given creative freedom and Sony didn't fully realize what they had until it won Game of the Year. It didn't win from strategy, but like, I want to say it was some sort of luck. I mean, it's not luck the game was that good. It was a good game. But it did push itself to an award from being an absolute treasure in 2024's releases. I played and got the platinum for Demon's Souls 2020, but that was a remake, and at the same time, it's good that the game isn't lost to being only on PS3. Bluepoint did so well on it that it made From Software feel a little pressured to make sure Elden Ring looked good. If you don't know, From Soft was the one that made the original Demon's Souls for PS3. They made the Dark Souls series, Bloodborne, Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, all bangers. 5+ years into this generation, that's essentially my first party exclusive list. Everything else I played on PS5 was a third-party game I could have gone on PC. And here's the thing, if you only have a PS5 and no other platforms, console is usually a great machine for third-party titles. The hardware is solid, the load times are genuinely fast, and multi-platform games run and look excellent on it. If PlayStation is your only avenue into gaming, you're not suffering, but that's a very different thing from the PS5 being a great PlayStation console. The system sellers, the really good exclusives, the games that make you feel like this particular machine was worth owning, those are what's been missing. Third-party games that kept the PS5 alive this generation. First-party Sony has largely let it coast. And where are these system sellers? PlayStation built its entire legacy on the back of exclusive, good-ass single-player experiences, and this generation they handed it the reins to live service experiments that largely flopped, delayed everything into oblivion, or just stayed completely silent. Before we even get to the games, let's talk about getting the console, because for a huge chunk of people, that was its own months-long nightmare. Getting a PS5 for the suggested retail price was nearly impossible in 2020 and 2021. Scalpers and scalping companies, unfortunately and unapologetically, those bastards bought the consoles in thousands to sell at massively marked up prices. Retailers tried innovative and sometimes effective ways to stop the practice, normally with like bundles, but it made a little difference in the long run. Bots swept up the inventory the moment that shit went live. By the time a normal person refreshed the page, the stock was already gone, and it was already in a scalper's cart destined for eBay at double or triple the price. The days when a PS5 could cost upward of $1,500 on eBay were very real. A $500 console flipped for $1,500, and Sony for the longest time did almost nothing meaningful about it. It got worse than just inflated prices. Scammers took advantage of the situation in deplorable ways, sending out boxes with bricks in them, tricking buyers into purchasing photos of PS5s hidden in fine print, although I will admit that was to trick bots into buying pictures of PS5s, and then selling empty boxes, just basically scamming people for their money. And this was the environment that just existed for the better part of 2 years. While everyday fans who had been loyal to the PlayStation brand for decades got shut out, people who deserved the console the most, ones who were genuinely excited, money in hand, who had been PlayStation fans for a while, were the ones waiting and refreshing and losing out, while people with bots and no interest in gaming whatsoever were hoarding them for profit. Scalpers reportedly made over $28 million in next-gen console profits through eBay alone as of December 2020. That's money that came directly out of the pockets of actual gamers, and the response from Sony and most major retailers was largely inadequate. Some half measures, some invite systems, some direct purchase programs, while the scalping continued largely unimpeded well into 2021. It was a measurable way to start a generation, and it colored the entire experience for anyone who had to watch scalpers flip a console they'd been dreaming about. And then there's the stick drift problem. So you finally got a PS5, whether through Sony Direct, a lucky refresh, or if you were desperate paying a scalper. You sit down, you start playing, and after a while of owning the system, start up your normal gaming session, and you see that your character starts moving on its own, or the camera drifts, your aim slides, and you haven't touched a stick. Congratulations, you met the DualSense's terrible weakness. Stick drift has been a widespread problem with the DualSense this entire generation, and it's infuriating on multiple levels. I personally had to replace 2 controllers because of it. Not dropping them, not abusing them, just using them normally until they started lying to me about where the stick was. And I'm far from alone. Studies suggest that around 40% of DualSense controllers exhibit stick drift after 300 hours of gameplay. For anyone who games regularly after owning a system for a while, that's not a long time at all. That's just a few months of normal play before your controller starts betraying you. The root cause is the potentiometer-based analog sticks Sony chose to use. As you tilt the stick, small conductive wipers move over an electrically resistive pad, and over time this resistive material wears away. changing the way the sticks behave, with voltages no longer reading as expected, causing your character to slowly drift rather than sit still. It's a known flaw in the design, and the fix has been sitting right there the whole time. Hall effect sensors, which use magnets instead of physical contact and are essentially immune to stick drift. Sony didn't use them. Instead, they charged you $70 for a controller that degrades by design, and then offered you the DualSense Edge, a $200 Pro controller, as the premium solution. And I own one, and I really wish that there were Hall effect or TMR options or third-party options available to put in the DualSense Edge. People in gaming forums have claimed that they've gone through multiple controllers due to drift. For a controller that costs $70, that's a hardware design problem that Sony never properly addressed. It's especially galling how much Sony's marketed the DualSense as a revolution in controller technology. The haptic feedback, the adaptive triggers, which I'll admit, they're both pretty cool. And the DualSense is great when the sticks work. But what good is a controller that feels incredible for a few months and then slowly loses its fucking mind? Sony sold this generation partly on the strength of their innovative controller and then built it on components that wear out faster than any reasonable person should expect. Much like Nintendo. And my next point is the live service catastrophe. Here's a thing that people need to understand about why the PS5 exclusive library feels so thin. Sony didn't just fail to make great games this generation, they actively burned years of development time, talent, and money chasing a strategy that was doomed from the start. And they did it knowingly with intent while their own developers were reportedly pushing back. Sony announced in 2022 that it wanted to release 12 live service games by 2025. By the time 2025 arrived, it had canceled 8 of those projects and effectively walked away from the entire strategy. 8 canceled games. Think about what this means in practice. That's years of development time from some of PlayStation's best studios that produced absolutely nothing for the people who bought a PS5. Naughty Dog, the studio behind The Last of Us and Uncharted, spent years developing a multiplayer Last of Us game before it was quietly killed. Insomniac, coming off the massive success of Spider-Man, was reportedly working on a live service Spider-Man project instead of the traditional sequel. Ben's studio, who made Days Gone and deserved a follow-up, had their live service projects scrapped too. Every single hour those teams spent on those dead projects was an hour they weren't spending on making the kinds of games that built PlayStation's reputation in the first place. And then there's Concord, the crown jewel of Sony's incompetence this generation. The disaster is so clusterfucked, it almost loops back into being impressive. It launched in late August 2024 with a $40 price tag, drew a generally positive critical response, but reportedly only sold 25,000 copies. Sony shut it down 2 weeks after launch. 2 weeks. The studio behind it, Firewalk, was acquired by Sony in 2023 and shut down right alongside the game less than a year and a half later. The whole thing was a spectacular, slow-motion shit show that had been going on for a while. A paid hero shooter entering a market already dominated by free-to-play titans like Overwatch and Apex. Made by a studio with no track record, launching into a genre with more than a dozen established competitors. Backed by Sony's misplaced confidence and that the live service gold rush still had room for one more. It didn't. It never did. Anyone paying attention was able to see that. What makes it worse is how much was sacrificed in pursuit of this strategy. According to insiders, Sony became shell-shocked from Concord and began going to every studio, reassessing every live service project, with any game-as-a-service game suddenly facing enormous friction to move forward. Which sounds like a course correction, except the correction came years too late after the damage was already done. The studios were gutted, the games were getting cancelled, and PlayStation fans were left staring at an exclusive library full of holes where great games should have been. Years of potential poured into a strategy that collapsed almost entirely, leaving almost nothing behind. And then there's the Blue Point disaster. Nothing encapsulates Sony's mismanagement this generation, quite like what happened to Blue Point Games. Okay, maybe Concord. And I mean that literally because the whole story is almost too perfectly stupid to be real. This is a studio that had spent 15 years, earning a reputation as arguably the best remake developer in the entire industry. God of War Collection, Uncharted the Nathan Drake Collection, Shadow of the Colossus, Demon Souls 2020. Not lazy cash grabs, but meticulous acts of craft, technical excellence, and preservation. These were games rebuilt from the ground up with genuine acknowledgement from the source material. Sony acquired them in 2021, right off the back of Demon Souls selling 1.4 million copies in its launch year. They saw exactly what Bluepoint was, bought them for it, and had every reason in the world just to let them keep doing what they were doing. Instead, Sony had the blueprint developing a live service God of War title, a project so fundamentally misaligned with the studio's identity, strengths, and entire reason for existing that it reads like a shitty joke. The people who painstakingly rebuilt Demon Souls into one of the most technically impressive games of the generation were put to work on a God of War live service game. Not a Bloodborne remake game, not something that could have been useful and actually admired. And bro, we need a Bloodborne remake. Or just give us Bloodborne 60 FPS. We got a live service game in a genre PlayStation had never successfully competed in. When Concord collapsed and Sony panicked, the God of War project was among the casualties. Bluepoint spent all of 2025 pitching new projects, including what was reportedly a return to single-player remakes, exactly what they should have been doing the whole time. But none of them got greenlit before Sony's business review concluded with the studio being shut down entirely. Around 70 employees lost their jobs, and Sony's official explanation was that the decision was made following a recent business review. A business review. That's the sanitized corporate language Sony deployed to explain dismantling a studio with a 20-year track record of delivering excellent work. No accountability for wasting them on the wrong project for years. No acknowledgement that Bluepoint never got a fair shot at what they actually excelled at after Sony bought them. No honest reckoning with the fact that the studio's death is a direct consequence of Sony's own strategic failures. Just a press statement praising their quote-unquote passion, creativity, and craftsmanship right before showing these passionate creative craftspeople the door. Think about what's been lost. A Bluepoint handled Bloodborne remake would have been a system seller on its own. They could have done other stuff too. PlayStation back catalog is deep and full of games that deserve the treatment only Bluepoint could give them. All of it gone. Not because Bluepoint failed, they never failed once. Sony failed Bluepoint repeatedly and completely and then closed them for it. And don't get me started on PSVR 2. While Sony was busy mismanaging its studios and botching its live service strategy, it also found time to fumble its premium VR hardware, a device that deserved better and got almost nothing. The PSVR 2 on a hardware level is genuinely impressive. OLED display, eye tracking, adaptive triggers on the controllers like we got on the DualSense. Inside-out tracking, the tech is real and the experience in the right game is legitimately great, and yet Sony managed to turn all of that into one of the generation's biggest disappointments through a combination of bad pricing, baffling restrictions, and near total abandonment. At $550 for a headset that required a $500 console just to operate, it was never going to make mainstream waves. That's a $1,000 plus investment before you buy a single game, just to play VR. The PSVR 2 required a specific console, a specific cable, and a commitment to play a library that Sony never adequately built out. To make things worse, at launch it had no PC support at all, so if you bought one you were entirely dependent on Sony's first-party VR output and whatever third parties chose to support it, which turned out to be not nearly enough. Sony eventually adapted PC support in August 2024, but you had to purchase a separate adapter for $54.99, and many of the headset's standout features, eye tracking, rumble, and HDR, are not supported when used on PC, so even the belated fix is a half measure. You're paying extra for an adapter to access a cut-down version of the headset's capabilities. The things that make PSVR 2 special over other PC VR options, the features that justify its price, are locked behind the PS5 ecosystem that Sony itself isn't fully supporting. Sony eventually halted production of the PSVR 2 due to excessive unsold stock, which tells you everything you need to know about how this went. It's a recurring pattern with Sony this generation, to make something with real potential, fail to support it adequately, watch it struggle, and quietly move on. PSVR 2 deserved a genuine first-party software push, it deserved backwards compatibility with PSVR 1 titles, it deserved a PC support from day one, not as a panicked afterthought once sales slowed. Instead, it got a thin library, an enormous price tag, and the kind of half-hearted corporate support that guarantees failure regardless of how good the underlying hardware is. While all this was happening, the canceled games, shuttered studios, hollow exclusive lineup, the drifting controllers, Sony was simultaneously and relentlessly making PlayStation more expensive to own. Every year, in multiple directions at once, the cost kept going up and the value kept going nowhere. Games jumped to $70 at the start of the generation and nobody pushed back hard enough, so they just became the new baseline. Then PlayStation Plus got a price hike in 2023 where the yearly essential subscription went from $59.99 to $79.99, extra rising to $134.99, and the premium landing at $159.99. Increases of roughly 33% all across the board, with no meaningful new benefits announced alongside them, no new features, no explanation beyond vague gestures at rising costs of maintaining the service. Sony's CEO later said openly that the company would continue to adjust pricing in a dynamic way to maximize profitability, which is executive talk for more hikes are coming and we're not going to apologize for them. Boo you. And then, to cap off a generation already defined by disappointment, the PS5 hardware itself was hiked to the point where it's now $150 more expensive than its launch price, and the PS5 Pro, which launched at an early steep $699.99, is now $200 more expensive than that. So let's add this up. You're paying more for the console, more for the games, more for the subscription you need just to play online, replacing controllers that drift out of warranty on your own dime, or unless you're looking like me, you were able to get a free replacement out of them as long as you showed proof of purchase, potentially sinking over $1,000 into a VR headset that Sony barely supported, and in exchange, you're getting a first-party exclusive lineup thinner than any PlayStation generation in recent memory, a live service graveyard full of canceled games that ate years of development time, and a company that just shut down one of its best studios rather than reckon honestly with its own failures. That's the deal. That's what Sony offered PS5 owners this generation. And the infuriating part, the part that really stings, is that they've largely gotten away with it because the PS5 sold well regardless, which Sony apparently reads as a sign that fans are satisfied. They're not satisfied, they're just loyal, and Sony has spent this entire generation mistaking one for the other. The PS5 generation isn't a catastrophe in the traditional sense, not like the Wii U, and for what it's worth, I actually thought the Wii U was pretty good, but Nintendo was also remarkably good at fumbling what they had with it. The PS5 hardware is great. There are genuinely excellent games on the platform, but as a PlayStation generation, is a showcase of what Sony's first-party empire can do when it's firing on all cylinders. It's been a profound disappointment. The live service obsession hollowed out the studio pipeline for years. The price hike compounded the frustration at every turn. PSVR 2 came and went like a silent fart. The controller's drift, Bluepoint is gone, and through all of it, the message from Sony's leadership has been some variation of, we're aware, we're adjusting, trust us. Now the PS6 rumors are building. Sony will soon be back at the podium promising a new era, a new vision, a reason to get excited again. And some part of me, that same part that stayed up refreshing stock trackers in 2020, it's not gonna feel that shit next time. Because we've already seen what Sony does with goodwill and momentum when they have it. They fumble it, waste it. It's been Bean Burrito. This is far different from what I'm normally done, but PlayStation has just disappointed me this generation after so much excitement. One game I don't know why. You already know the meme. Game is game, or in this instance, there's no games. It's been Bean Burrito. I upload regularly. Normally I'm about other stuff, just talking about life. I upload regularly, do what you want with that information. Don't work too hard, I'll try not to.